right now we're going to sort of start talking with our panelists. So we're so excited to have them here today. So we have Carolyn Etzelvetter of A Yard and a Half Landscaping Cooperative and Ralph Beisler of the Railroad Avenue Supply Company and the Stamford Ace Hardware Store. So if you guys want to come down and have a seat, we'll get that part of the program started. Thank you so much. So we have more chairs than we need here, but if you guys want to sit there.
Oops.
I didn't use the mic because no one cares what I have to say. It's all about you guys. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for inviting us.
So let's get started. So Ralph, maybe we'll start with you if that's okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your story? You're both worker owners. What did that mean for you? What did the transition look like? Why are you here?
Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me. This is one of my favorite parts of New York State. When I was a teenager, some friends and I went on three canoe trips here, and we rented a canoe from the Blue Mountain Lake Boat Livery, which we drove by this morning when we were looking for a coffee shop. I grew up on a dairy farm in the Schoharie Valley, mostly during the 1950s. In 1963, when I was finishing my sophomore year in college, my parents sold the farm and bought a small Western auto store in Stamford, New York, which is in the northern corner of Delaware County, about 20 miles south of the home farm. Mom passed away in 1968, and Dad died suddenly in 1975. As Dad's executor, I had the task of settling his estate, which included making a decision about the store's future. I was able to get a year's unpaid leave from my job, and we moved our small young family to Stamford so we could keep the store operating while we decided what to do with it. Obviously, I never went back to that job because I continued with the store. There were a lot of ups and downs in our early years, but I guess that the ups prevailed because the store is still in business today. Here are a few of our milestones. In 1976, we purchased the store from Dad's estate. In 77, we remodeled the storefront and facade. In 79, we did a major remodel of the store interior, including new flooring and new fixtures. We also added a garage with storage above. We needed the garage because if you remember Western auto stores, they sold tires and batteries. In 1987, we affiliated with Ace Hardware and added Ace Paint to our inventory. And Ace Paint has been our core item, or our core department, since then. In 88, we severed ties with Western Auto, amicably, but we left them. In 1995, we purchased the building next door. And of course, ours is a downtown store. We're on a business block downtown. We expanded into the store next door, and we brought our total floor space from 2,400 square feet to 4,000 square feet. An interior remodel included new, heavier-duty fixtures and a new, more efficient floor plan. Inventory was expanded in all departments. In 1997, we incorporated the business as Railroad Avenue Supply Company Incorporated. In 2003, we added a Radio Shack Select store in about 700 square feet of the existing space. In 2005, we completed another remodel of the hardware store interior. This included a new sheet vinyl floor and new ceiling and lighting. In 2012, we closed the Radio Shack, devoted that space to plumbing and heating. In 2017, and this is where it gets interesting, my wife Nancy, who's here with us, and I took off in our RV for a 2-month cross-country trip. When we returned, the store was operating almost as if we hadn't been away. I think this was a sign. In 2018, we began discussions with staff about becoming an employee cooperative. We enlisted the help of the Cooperative Development Institute, and Rob Brown is here today. And on January 1st of 2019, we completed the legal conversion of the business to a cooperative corporation. I sold my corporate stock. I owned 100% of the business at that time. I sold my stock to the corporation. Today, I am a member of the co-op and continue as president this year. My role has changed from manager to trainer and consultant. I am present in the store between 3 and 4 days a week and expect to be almost fully retired by the end of 2020. I would like to fill in during employee vacations if they still want me, and I'll still be involved because I still own the store building. That's my story so far.
That's great. Carolyn, do you want to share yours with us?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, Ralph, I want to say I'm so honored to be on a panel with you because you're a wonderful model of exiting in a good way, and it's nice to see the amount of trust that you have in your employees. So for the last 19 years, I've worked for Yard and a Half Landscaping, which is a residential design, build, maintain firm on the outskirts of Boston. And about 5 years ago, we formed an employee-owned cooperative to buy out our boss for when she was retiring. And as Danny alluded to in the introduction, the lead up to that was much longer. So that, the actual from starting talking to the employees about employee ownership to officially signing papers took about 18 months. But there was about a 5-year period of really structuring the business in a way that Eileen, the owner, was ready to exit. And I think that's sort of an important thing to know is sort of looking at your financials, looking at your management team, your procedures, all those things. She really put a lot of thought and effort into that. And I think that's part of what's made us a success. So when we did the conversion, there were 10 of us who were sort of the founding worker owners out of a staff of 20. We had about $2 million a year in revenue. And after 5 years in operation as a co-op, we now have 19 worker owners and 32 employees. And last year we finished the year with $3.5 million in revenue. So, I feel like it's been a really amazing success, both in that we've been able to, pay down our loan just out of the regular operations of the business. And so we'll be, complete owners as of July of this year. But also that both the business has flourished and the individual worker owners have flourished. About 90% of my coworkers are Central American immigrants, and in the time that they've been part of the co-op, they've taken on sort of more responsibility in the business. Many of them grew up during the Civil War in El Salvador in the 80s, and so there's sort of a hand-to-mouth mentality of not being able to trust what's happening next. And part of ownership has been really learning to take a longer view and be able to trust that they have a stake in this business. It's not going anywhere. They can plan for their future. They can set up a retirement account and a college savings account for their kids. So we have the first child of a worker owner started college this year, and a bunch of folks have bought houses. So it feels very positive, not only for what it's done for the business, being able to continue Eileen's legacy, but also what it's done for our worker owners and for the larger community that they live in.
Carolyn, what did that first conversation, or how did that sort of the germs of starting to convert to worker ownership start?
Eileen had started talking about, I want to retire when I'm 65, and she's set the expectation early. And she was exploring a number of different options. I mean, she did everything to prepare the business for sale without necessarily knowing was that going to be to us or to an outside buyer. But when we started looking at it with the transition team, when she presented worker ownership as an option, we became really conscious that our industries it's a really rough industry, particularly for immigrant workers. It's dangerous. There's a lot of wage theft. People knew that an incoming buyer probably would not treat them the way that she had. So there was really a lot of interest in preserving, our autonomy. And so I think it felt scary, both because she looked at the group, most of whom were mowing lawns and laying pavers. She looked at the group and thought, I don't know if you guys know how to do this, to run a business. And we had the same question ourselves. But I think because we had a long runway, we were really able to put the things in place that we needed to sort of, train up those of us who were going to be taking over management and also build some consensus among the groups so that we were ready to do that.
Do you feel like there were questions that you wish you or members of your team had wished you had asked earlier in that process that you would recommend other folks make sure they ask?
Yeah, I mean, one big thing is technical assistance and getting outside people like Rob or Frank who know what they're doing to support that process, because I think often business owners don't know what they know, and so much lives in that one head. Not only about the nuts and bolts of understanding your financial statements, but about, what's the big picture of the business environment you're operating in? How do you notice changes and respond to them when they come? I think because of the financial pressure of, needing to buy a successful business with a large selling price, I think we didn't understand that we could have and should have advocated for some more technical assistance up front. And we've ended up, doing it on the back end, and it's been okay. But I think really asking how can we get external help and somehow structure that into the deal would have been, it would have helped us hit the ground running.
Yeah.
May I ask, what do you mean by technical assistance?
So there are people who, and Rob will probably speak to this a little more later, but there are people who work in co-op development specifically who, oversee a lot of these transitions, and they often know what questions the business owners and the employees should be asking, not just in terms of business plan or finances or the legal questions about incorporation, but also governance. Okay, you're going from one person making all the decisions to 6, 10, 20 people making the decisions. How is that going to be structured? How are you going to decide who decides what? How do you help people make that mental shift from I clock in, I clock out, I'm done, to everything about this business is my problem? And that's a real culture change. I mean, depending on what the retiring owner's personality is, it can be more or less of a stretch. But, if you have somebody who really holds a lot of the decision making and the judgment in that one owner, there's a lot of cultural change that needs to happen to kind of share that around and create a more democratic workplace.
Ralph, did you know anything about worker ownership or cooperatives before you sort of moved into this as an option, or what turned you onto it?
Actually, I did. Back probably around 2005 or 2006, I had read an article about a manufacturing company in Ohio that had formed an employee cooperative and taken over the business from the sole owner. And we looked into it with an attorney, a local attorney at that time. We learned that we could do it, but then some things happened with the staff that I had at the time that made me feel that it wasn't the right time to do it, that the people I had weren't going to be able to work together well enough to make it work. So it went on the back burner for a while, and I approached owners of Ace Hardware stores that had multiple stores to see if they would be interested in buying our business. And for the most part, their response was that it was too small. At the time, we were doing around 620,000 a year in sales. We're now up a little above 700,000, and that's gained over the last 3 or 4 years. But they were looking for stores that were doing $1.5 million in sales, and had a bigger footprint, more space. I advertised locally, and I had some local folks interested in the business, but for them to get financing, they had to have $100,000 in cash. Well, for them to get financing and get credit with ACE, they had to come up with $100,000 in cash. And I didn't encounter anybody with that kind of money. So after our trip, I came back, and a local locksmith, a retired locksmith, had seen the for sale sign and went in the store and approached several of my employees and said, why don't you form an employee co-op? So the groundwork I had done before came back to me, and the locksmith's intervention got all of us thinking about it, and we started having meetings. I think before we had any meetings, I contacted Rob because I had gotten his name. But the locksmith actually gave us a CD with a lot of information about co-ops on it. And I had read much of it before, but it gave me the information about the CDI and about Rob. And we made contact the middle of last year and got started from that.
So you had a much quicker transition than a lot of folks.
Well, there were a number of things in our favor. One was that the business had very little debt. In fact, when we did the bylaws and everything, we had no mortgage on the building and no loans on the business itself. Of course, there were the ongoing accounts payable, but nothing long term, and nothing outstanding on the line of credit. I owned a supermajority of the stock, and before we converted, I purchased the other outstanding stock from my 2 sons and 2 employees who had stock. So that made it, and I was willing to do the financing. The other factors that helped was that we were already incorporated, and the word corporation, or the word INC period, was in the name of the corporation. In New York State, that allowed us to convert to a cooperative without forming a new corporation. And we had the assistance of an attorney who works with CDI to help us get through that. We valued the business with the help of CDI and with the help of Castle Wealth Management, which is a company that had done a valuation 4 or 5 years before, and it turned out that the values came out pretty close to each other. So we knew what the business was worth. And the staff was willing to give it a try. So
When you first approached them, were you worried about approaching them about it? How did you go about that first conversation?
well, before we actually had a meeting, I knew that several. We have a 6-member co-op. 4 members are full-time employees. I'm the former owner, and we have 1 part-time employee who is also the vice mayor or the deputy mayor of our village, and is a retired school principal. So he was pretty valuable in the transition as well. But even before we had our first meeting, there was quite a bit of discussion about forming a cooperative and becoming owners. And I guess there was probably one employee I was worried about, because they had to come up with some money, and we kept it low. We made the buy-in $2,000, and some of us came up with a lump sum, so we'd have some seed money to get started with, and others are doing it by payroll deduction every week. So at $20 a week, it takes 100 weeks to buy the full share. But everybody came into it.
Yeah.
And so far it's working. I'm getting my rent payments and my note payments every month, and I'm doing a lot of training, and I think that's going to be essential. I've got to stay with it and make sure people know what they're doing. But the other thing I have to be very careful of is I have to get rid of the boss mentality. I have to let other people lead. So if I see something wrong, I've got to talk to our general manager rather than saying, Jim, you correct this, or Bob, you correct that. So it's going to be interesting. I hope over the next year and a half I can handle it.
So everybody is a worker owner
We have,
that works there.
we have a college student, a high school student, and a retired postman who are part-timers. They are not members of the co-op at this point, but there's nothing to prevent a part-timer from becoming a member of the co-op. And as I transition out, they'll have to hire somebody else. Hopefully it'll be part-time and not full-time, but they will have to hire somebody else who may become a member.
Yeah.
I think there's a question.
Okay.
There was a question. So in terms of transferring wealth to you so that you can afford to retire, how does that work if people are buying shares at $2,000 to buy in? Do you retain ownership of the real estate?
Well, I do own the real estate. But I owned 100% of the shares in the corporation. I sold them to the corporation, not to the individuals. So, and Rob can probably explain this better than I can, but they each have a member equity share, and those shares, it starts out at the $2,000, and some of them are still building that up. But as the business continues, each year as we make profits, those profits, instead of being corporate profits and taxed at a corporate rate, those profits are passed on to the employee owners, and they're taxed to them individually. Now, some of that will be passed on in cash, and some of it will be additional member equity. The thinking is that probably at least initially, probably 20% will be cash, and the rest will be member equity that stays in the corporation to provide working capital.
And in terms of your specific question, so I think sort of underlying what you were saying is that so then the corporation takes the note for the purchase price, and there are different ways that people do that. Whether is it all to you or you have some outside financing?
At this point, it's all to me.
So you're holding the note and you're getting payments.
Right. So I actually, because it's a 15-year note and I'm 75, we're using the payments as retirement income. I'm not trying to, for tax purposes, I have to separate it into capital gains and interest income, but it goes toward our living expenses.
Carolyn, you have a lot more worker owners and then employees on top of that. Sort of what does that dynamic look like in terms of folks deciding to be the worker owners or being invited to that table, or what that looks like? And are there misconceptions about the structure of management versus worker ownership?
That was a lot of questions.
Sorry,
It's okay.
Sorry. And not one I sent you ahead of time. I apologize.
To start with the having employees and worker owners part, when we did the conversion, we felt like there were folks who had been with the business for a long time who, because of different life circumstances of, caring for an aging parent or whatever, they didn't feel like they could make the commitment to buy in as owners, and yet, we wanted, obviously, to preserve their jobs. So we, created the opportunity to have, either worker ownership or to just remain an employee. And I think for cultural reasons, probably there's going to come a time where it'll be good to sunset that, because it does create sort of, some tension for us. And I don't think it does for everybody, but in our particular case, I think it's taken a while to sort of understand that the worker owners don't actually have a lot more power, they just have a lot more responsibility. But sometimes there's, both, there's sort of a grass is greener dynamic there. That's a challenge. And in terms of having a larger number of worker owners, I think the big thing is just getting very clear about who makes what decisions and how. And so, we sort of have a little matrix of, what's a management decision, what's a board decision, what's an all-member decision. And we, refer ourselves back to that periodically if somebody's like, but wait a minute, how are we buying that? But I think it's just important to decide together how you're going to decide, and then hold yourselves accountable to sticking to that. And there's, that's another of those things with working with a co-op developer is that there's some good guidance out there about how to think about who makes what decision and why.
And I know you touched on this when you first started talking, but was there anything about the sort of financial transaction that you kind of wanted to add or touch upon about how that came to fruition for the transition?
Yeah, I mean, our financing was interesting enough that there have been some good case studies written on it because it was a successful business and it was a large amount that we had to come up with. And the owner did not want to self-finance. Ultimately, our main funder, who, full disclosure, I'm now a part-time employee of Cooperative Fund of New England, they really wanted to see the owner have some continuing stake to assure that, she was really, that it was the real deal. And so, she put in about 10%. We, the worker owners, put in about another 10% out of our initial buy-ins. And then a large chunk came from Cooperative Fund. And then we also, because we're a seasonal business, we're landscapers in Massachusetts, we're very dependent on having a line of credit. And that's much harder to get than other financing because banks are a little iffy about working with worker co-ops. So Cooperative Fund was able to do the line of credit and a loan for, I think, 40% of the financing. And then the gap we made up with sort of friends and family financing and, having some people, do unsecured loans out of the goodness of their heart because they believed in what we were doing. So it definitely took some creativity, but we made it work. And I just want to echo the other thing that you said about being debt-free. We did have some debt on vehicles and stuff that we needed to pay off, and it was sort of like a big surprise to the owner that, that's the co-op assuming those loans becomes income to her. So getting all of that taken care of on the front end is really important.
Do we have other questions?
Can both of you speak just a little bit more about your particular management transitions? Like, we're talking about the employee ownership transition, but on the day-to-day operational management transition, could you speak to that a little bit, how that's going, and your experience?
Sure. So we had a big question about what to do with management because Eileen knew when she turned 65 she wanted to be gone. And so she spent about a year in the lead up training me and my co-CEO to sort of assume all of the tasks that she'd been doing. So he sort of did all of the operational end, and I did all of the business management and administrative end. And we had a really hard set of conversations about should we hire an external general manager and just sort of make a one-to-one replacement for her position rather than trying to train internally. And what we realized is that the group that we had would not have accepted, it was such a big change already with the co-op. They would not have accepted a new person coming in, and they would have sort of perceived that as just like exchanging one boss for another, whereas we were co-workers, and so it felt a little more democratic. But we tried, other than changing personnel, we tried to really keep day-to-day management very much the same. So we still have a hierarchy. We have project managers, we have crew leaders, we have laborers, because it's a big enough operation that you need some structure to keep it running. And again, we were trying to really minimize how much day-to-day change people had in their work experience.
What we did is, when we started, we had a pretty good idea of who the general manager would be. Sarah has a lot of retail experience, and she's worked in the store full-time since 2013. And even without a title, she was functioning as a leader to the other employees. For example, she would make a list. She works Saturday through Wednesday. So on Wednesday, she would make a list of things that needed to be done on Thursday and Friday, and the employees who were working those 2 days would work on getting those things done. Not always successfully, but the idea was there. So by consensus, Sarah was designated as general manager. All of our members are also members of the board because it's a small group. So we have 6 members and we have a 6-member board, and we meet monthly. People still work within the roles that they had before, but they're picking up new things too. Kelly has a lot of IT experience, and he has developed a website for us. We didn't have that before. He's doing some work with advertising that I would have done in the past. Stefano is our treasurer. He's taken on doing deposits. He's taken on reconciling the bank statements every month, so that we have one person, Sarah or myself, writing the checks, and it's being checked each month by somebody else in the corporation. It's a struggle for me, as I said, to become a trainer and consultant and not the boss. And I catch myself every day stepping out of my proper role and giving directions. And I think I'm doing it less, and hopefully by the end of 2020, I won't be doing it at all. But it's still there, and there's still a lot of knowledge that I have to impart. Something new comes up at least every week, and sometimes every day, that I have to teach somebody about.
More questions?
I'd like to talk a little bit more about financing. There are 2 things that we're still working on. One is we have had a line of credit at the local bank, and they've agreed to continue that as long as I'm still a part owner. But that means that I'm also liable, because I'm the only one with the wherewithal to be liable. We expect to pay that off, so it's down to 0 this week. We're not going to close it until after the 20th, just to make sure we have enough money to pay sales tax this month. But we will be working with the Cooperative Fund of New England as well. We've already talked to them, and we expect to be getting a line of credit from them. The other thing is, it's important to have a corporate credit card. A debit card, we have a debit card tied to the bank account, but that doesn't always cut it. It's not, there are times when you might need to purchase something that you have to pay for over 2 or 3 months rather than 1 month. Or at the time you make the purchase, you don't have quite enough money in the bank account to cover it. So we'll be looking for a corporate credit card that does not require one of the members of the corporation to be a co-signer. And I don't know if we'll find that or not, but we're looking. So those are 2 things that are incomplete as of this point.
Related to that, I'll also say that for us, one of the benefits of it being a conversion is that we have a lot of vendor accounts with nurseries, stone yards, those sorts of things. And basically because all of our staff and all of our processes were going to remain the same, all of our vendors were willing to keep our revolving credit lines open without anyone needing to put up a personal guarantee. They had a personal guarantee from our former owner, but when we sort of explained, hey, the structure is much more distributed ownership, but nothing's going to change in our ability to make our payments, they were willing to extend terms based on that. So I feel like that was a real benefit. Because we haven't had any success with a corporate card. We're still, we have individuals on cards and on a couple of truck and vehicle loans. Although after about 3 years, we were able to get credit in the co-op's name and start purchasing vehicles and stuff on our own.
I'd like to comment on that as well. We deal primarily with one supplier, Ace Hardware, and our transition was actually made easier because we were able to keep the same corporate name, the same employer ID number, and the same customer number with Ace. If we had changed any of those, the cooperative would have had to reapply to ACE for credit, and that process would have involved an extra $12,000 to $15,000 in expense because of the fees that they charge up front. Because we amended the Articles of Incorporation, all we had to do was submit a new list of owners, and then we had to sign as owners, but they sent us a personal guarantee, but I called them and said, we're not signing that, and they said, okay. Well, and the other factor there, ACE itself is a cooperative, and our corporation, Railroad Avenue Supply Company, has built up ACE stock over the years. So we have $80,000 plus or minus worth of ACE stock. We have never owed ACE anywhere near that amount of money. So they're pretty well secured. If we don't pay, they don't buy the stock back when the store sells or closes. It would have been nice for me to get that $80,000 out up front, but then I would have had to invest it. This way, it's still invested in the business. But that was part of the purchase of the business.
What were some of the legal costs to have this transition happen and have the employees become owners and all that?
Okay, I'll tackle that one first. Not a lot. About $12,000 or $13,000. We used an attorney recommended by Cooperative Development Institute to amend the bylaws and the certificate of incorporation. He charged us about $1,900. My attorney, handling my personal end of it, charged me about the same. And then we paid 2.5% of the transaction. The transaction was $230,000. We paid 2.5% of that to Cooperative Development Institute, and that was divided between me paying and the corporation paying. And in addition to that, we committed to pay Cooperative Development Institute $150 a month for 3 years for continued consulting. And then our board member, who's the vice principal and the deputy mayor, got in touch with the local industrial development agency, and we were able to sit down with them and get the corporation's share of those expenses, which amounted to about $10,300, covered by a convertible loan. The loan is convertible to a grant once the obligations that it was to cover are paid. So we've already demonstrated that those are paid. We paid the $150 a month for 3 years in a lump sum to CDI. And so we've already demonstrated to the IDA that we have fulfilled that commitment. So that of course that becomes income to us, to the store, but it also helped us with the cash flow to get those things paid off. I learned from him, from the IDA person, that we probably could have gotten more money if we had gone to them before making the transition, before actually converting the business. So that would be a lesson for people who are doing it in the future.
So we do have to wrap up this portion of the program, so we're just going to take a minute and move some stuff around. But will you guys be available for a few minutes after if folks have additional questions? Wonderful. And thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your stories. We really appreciate you being here, and both of you for traveling to be here with us today and talk about your experience. So thank you so much.
Nice to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.